Well, hello friends, and welcome back to episode number 2 of YMCast. It is good to be with you as always. I hope you're having a good week. It's been quite wet this week, so I hope that you've been staying dry and staying warm. We've got an excellent episode prepared today, but as always, we're going to just start in prayer. Lord of our windswept lives, shelter us today. In the lee of your presence, still our blustering insecurities, our stormy protests, our billows of indignation, our squalls of regret. Give us harbour time in the deep, calm, safe water of your grace and love. Amen. That prayer that I just said is from this year's prayer handbook. It was written by Barbara Glasson, the former president of the conference. I know that you can get those from Methodist Publishing if you want to follow along. It has different prayers for every day. For example, as I filmed this, it is the 29th today. So today we are praying with Christians in Europe, the Global United Methodist Church and Britain, and we pray in particular for the Yorkshire North and East District. And when this comes out, which will be on Wednesday, we'll be praying with Christians in Europe and Britain, in particularly Portugal, Spain, the Conference of European Churches, the Community of Protestant Churches in Europe, and the European Methodist Council, and in the UK, in particular for the Scotland district of the Methodist Church. So it's a really handy resource. It's got lots of different prayers in there that you can kind of pray along and go through, and it's a really great routine to be getting into. So this week we're going to do this first in a 4-part series that we're going to be doing on YMCast, looking at the history of the Methodist Church, and I get to hand over to Jonathan Hustler, the Secretary of the Methodist Conference.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Hustler. I'm the Ministerial Coordinator for Oversight of Ordained Ministries in the Methodist Church. But I'm here today to offer you an overview of the history of the Methodist Church so that we can understand how the Church comes to be the way that it is at the beginning of the 21st century. The origins of Methodism are in the 18th century Evangelical Revival. The 18th century was a period of great change in Britain. It was a time of political change with the union of the parliaments of England and Scotland. It was a time of change in farming. The agricultural revolution began in the 18th century with improvements in food production, but that led to considerable unemployment and changes in the way that land was owning, resulting in an increased gap between the wealth of the poorest and the richest in society. It was a time of rapid population growth. It is estimated that the population of England doubled between 1700 and 1800. It was in many ways a violent century. Britain was almost constantly at war with France or with Spain, and sometimes with both together. Partly those wars were fought over overseas territories. The 18th century was the age of exploration, with James Cook and others establishing new colonies. It saw the beginnings of what was to become the British Empire. Trade was developing between Britain and India, and between Britain, the new colonies in North America, and Africa. And of course, this was the time when Britain acquired and then lost most of its North American colonies. Against that background, there was a movement within the Protestant churches of Britain that we call the Evangelical Revival. The Evangelical Revival was by no means confined to Britain. It was a movement that swept through much of continental Europe and North America. A movement that saw spiritual renewal, with churches rediscovering their energy to proclaim the gospel more widely. It was a time when the Protestant churches were to record considerable numerical growth, when they found that they were able to advertise that the spirituality of their members had considerably deepened. It was a century that saw the creation of a number of new denominations. But in Britain, it also saw the renewal of what we call the Old Descent, the Independents, the Baptists, the Congregationalists, and of renewal in parts of the Church of England and the Church of Scotland. A number of key figures are associated with this time of renewal. Amongst them, the remarkable Selina, Countess of Huntingdon, a wealthy noblewoman who established her own collection of preachers and her own group of chapels. There was George Whitefield, a significant preacher on both sides of the Atlantic, and there was Howell Harris, a Welsh evangelist who brought renewal to parts of that principality, along with his contemporary Daniel Rowland. There was the remarkable and saintly Fletcher of Madeley and other ministers of the Church of England who were involved in the revival. There were offshoots of the German churches and of the Moravians, led by Count Nicholas von Zinzendorf, who become very much part of the story of early Methodism. And of course, leading among those names associated with the Evangelical Revival are those of John and Charles Wesley. The Wesley Brothers were born in Epworth in the county of Lincolnshire, where their father was the rector of the parish. Their mother, Susanna, was a remarkable figure. She had 10 surviving children, and she's noted for spending time with each of them and working consciously to develop their spirituality and Christian commitment. Both the Wesley brothers studied at Oxford, where they were contemporaries of George Whitefield. The name Methodist originates from a society that they established there, also known as the Holy Club, called Methodist because of the methodical nature of their commitment to the Christian faith. They worked out their faith by regular Bible study, by times of prayer and fasting, by consciously looking to do good works, such as visiting prisoners and giving money to the poor. After Oxford, both the brothers were to be part of the establishment of the colony of Georgia, though that was a very unhappy episode, and they returned to England in early 1738. Both brothers had been conscious that there was something missing in their experience of Christianity, that they were doing their best to be faithful disciples, and yet they knew that they wanted something more. And in May 1738, both of them experienced a sense of new birth, of assurance that they were truly Christ's disciples. We talk about John's Aldersgate experience from the meeting at which he felt his heart strangely warmed. And it was from that experience that their subsequent ministry was to follow. A ministry that involved considerable preaching. They preached in churches, but also in the open air. In 1739, for the first time, John Wesley, in his words, consented to be more vile and to preach to the miners at Kingswood. Through that preaching, they were able to take the gospel to large numbers of people who were not part of the creaking parish system of 18th century Anglicanism. The Evangelical Revival of the Methodists also included the writing and the singing of hymns, many of them by Charles Wesley, and resulted in the formation of societies. Those early Methodist converts were organised into groups who met to hear the preaching of the Methodist preachers. And those societies were organised into classes or bands, small groups of people who met together to encourage each other in their discipleship. Because key to Methodism was the importance of personal discipline. Each week, when a band or class met, the members questioned each other on how faithful they had been to their commitment as Christians. The societies were organised into a connection. And from 1744, John Wesley called together his preachers to meet in conference. And from that conference, the government of the connection was organised. The rules of the societies were established. Annually they met to review the progress that the movement was making and what changes they needed to make. All this was designed to be a society within the life of the Church of England. But a key moment came in 1784. Following the American War of Independence, John Wesley was concerned for the spiritual feeding of the American colonists. And therefore he ordained two people to be superintendents of the work in America. Those ordinations were significant in that they marked to some extent a breach between Methodism and the Church of England. They also marked the moment when the United Methodist Church of the United States of America has its origin. The UMC has gone its own way in many ways. It has a different polity from the Methodist Church in Britain and is a much larger presence in World Methodism than the Methodist Church in Britain can be. Much of World Methodism owes its existence to the missionary work of the United Methodist Church.
Really interesting video, and next week we will be exploring Methodism in the 19th century. So this is the time of year where we would have been having Messy Harvest. Obviously, due to COVID and things like that, we have been unable to meet, but I know Linda and Jane have been working really hard behind the scenes and have been preparing, if I can get a drum roll please, goodie bags for everyone that would kind of like one, with different bits and pieces to take part in your Methodist in. I know there are only a few still available, so if you would like to get one of those, please do get in contact with us or with Linda. But we thought we'd share with you just two of the things that we had in Messy Harvest this year. First is an activity, and the second is a bit of a retelling of a certain Bible story with some familiar faces.
A story from the Bible. Jesus feeds more than 5,000 people.
Jesus went across Lake Galilee. He walked up a large hill and sat down with his disciples. A large crowd followed him because they had seen him heal those who were ill. Jesus saw the people coming, and so he said to his disciple Philip,
Philip, where can we go to buy food for all these people?
For everyone to have enough bread, it would cost more than 200 silver coins to get enough.
Another of his disciples, Andrew, said,
There's a boy over there who has 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, but that won't be enough for everyone.
Make the people sit down.
There was a lot of grass there, so all the people sat down on the grass. There were about 5,000 men, plus women and children.
Jesus took the 5 loaves of bread, said thank you to God for them. He did the same with the fish. He then gave the bread and the fish to all the people who were sitting there. They all had as much as they wanted.
When they were all full, Jesus said to his disciples,
Collect all the food that's left over. Let's not waste any.
So the disciples collected all that was left over and filled 12 baskets with the leftover bread and fish. Seeing this miracle that Jesus had performed, the people said,
Surely this was the prophet who was to come into the world.
I can tell you that it was a really fun morning me and George and Peter and Linda had, jumping around the Scots back garden, catching bits of food. But we hope that you really enjoyed those. And as I said, if you want a bag for Messy Harvest, please do get in contact with me. So thank you for joining us for this episode of YMCast. As always, it's brilliant to be with you. If you'd like to get involved with the show, please do get in contact with me and use the hashtag YMCcast. It's always great to hear from people. So I hope you have a good week, and I shall see you soon.